Representative Haws of Boise sits on the Agriculture Affairs Committee, the Commerce and Human Resource Committee, and the State Affairs Committee. She joins us this week to talk about a potential repeal of Medicaid expansion, budget negotiation, her legislative priorities, and plans for re-election. So, Representative Haws, thank you so much for joining us here today. The first question we wanted to ask you is, what has the general atmosphere been like this week in the legislature, and what are some of the major bills that have been worked on?
I would say the atmosphere here is busy. So we've reached the point in the session where there's a real energy to get the bills moved between both houses. So a lot of back and forth is happening between the Senate and the House at this point in the session. And people are working really hard. So the committees are still busy. They haven't quite slowed down as much, especially the germane committees where we can still hear new RSs and new legislation. So just this morning in State Affairs, we had at least 4 new RSs, which are those pieces of proposed legislation that we are voting whether to print or not. And I believe we'll have about 3 weeks, that's what I'm hearing, in the hallway here left at the State House. Yeah, in terms of the legislation, specific pieces of legislation that have been worked on, I think the biggest piece of news is that the Senate yesterday rejected the Health and Human Services budget. They voted 10 to 25, I believe it was, to reject what is a $5.7 billion budget. So what will happen now is it'll be sent back to the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, or JFAC, for revisions, and then it will need to go through the 2 houses again to pass.
And I know that you had mentioned a little bit about the budget and just the atmosphere of the legislature. Can you tell us specifically about the 4% potential budget cut that could be signed or vetoed into law this week by the governor, and how you voted on that and the effect it may have on your constituents? Yeah,
so I voted no on the 4% budget holdback that is being sent to the governor's office. Yeah. So House Bill 1375 is that bill that really is what we would call a Christmas tree bill, where we're not just voting on one part of the budget, but we're voting on holdbacks on, many different parts of our budget. And the reason why I voted no is that I think we should do more work to more strategically make cuts to particularized areas and not to others, because we know that there are just some critical services that we really should keep funding. There's a lot of work that's been done to study the impact of potential cuts and what that would mean down the road for Idahoans. And so, like dropping a penny into a wishing pond, you see the first ripple, at the beginning, but it's not until some time has passed that the remaining ripples reach the outside edge of that wishing pond. And I really have grave concerns about what it will mean for Idaho. Not necessarily next year. It's going to be really tough right now, and it already has been with the holdbacks we have in place. But what it will mean down the road for our state that we're making these huge budget rescissions. So.
And I know that you talked about the potential of what those budget cuts could have. Also this week in the House, there was a bill that passed out of committee that would be looking to repeal Medicaid expansion, which is something that passed on an election ballot initiative a few years ago. Could you tell us your opinions on that bill and how you'd plan to vote if that came to the House floor?
Certainly. This legislation that would repeal Medicaid expansion would likely strip healthcare from about 90,000 Idahoans on a conservative count. Several weeks ago, I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but we had an open forum for folks in Idaho that rely on that expansion for services for their families. And we received more than 4 hours of in-person testimony about what it would mean for Idahoans if that voter expanded Medicaid expansion were to be repealed. And what it would mean is that people who are able to work in our state right now because their family members have that support services, those support services would no longer be able to go to work. That's going to impact our economy and those families' bottom lines. There's also the issue that a lot of the folks that utilize those Medicaid expansion monies are being paid to take care of their own loved ones, and they testified that they not only are they often the best people to do that because they are there in the home with their husband or their wife or their kids, but they there are not care providers in the state of Idaho that are available to work for the same rates. And so we're just going to leave a lot of people without care, and it could result in, furthering their situations that they're dealing with, their health complications, and in some cases it could mean, people die. I mean, this is like a very significant issue for our state, and I think that in the debate on the Senate floor yesterday, I want to commend Senator Guthrie, and this was about the Health and Human Services budget. He said, at the end of the day, this is not a partisan issue, but it's truly a moral one, and we need to consider what we're doing to Idahoans when we make these budget cuts.
And I know that the budget has been a real major focus of this legislative session, but what would you say are your other legislative priorities? What else have you been working on or trying to get through this session?
Yeah, so I've been trying to support all of the legislation surrounding housing affordability. We hear, from the state survey every year, Idahoans are really struggling on affordability issues. And so when we can help make housing more available and affordable, that is something that I will support every day of the week. I am obviously very concerned about potential cuts to public education. We know that we're already strapped when it comes to paying our teachers what they're due, and that our students need the critical funding that we are supplying them now. We are failing to meet our special education budget needs, and further cuts would absolutely devastate those programs and leave us in a situation where we're unable to comply with federal law. So I've been watching those things really closely. Because I sit on House State Affairs, there have been significant pieces of what I would call social legislation that have come through the committee. And I truly feel that we live in Idaho for a reason, because we like our freedoms and we like to live life as free as possible from state interference with our personal lives. And I over and over again have questioned my colleagues about, why we want the state to intrude upon public life and personal decisions in the way that many pieces of that legislation do. So I unfortunately have spent a lot of my time on those pieces of legislation when I'd rather be spending time solving, real problems for the 98% of Idahoans that need us to do that.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Representative Haws, for joining us today. I just have one more question for you. So candidates recently had to file to run for re-election, and I know that about a year ago you were appointed to your seat, and I was just wanted to ask you what your plans are for re-election, if you're planning on seeking re-election, and anything else that you'll be working on come the campaign season.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I was appointed in late July of 2025 to replace Todd Achilles in my seat when he vacated the seat to run for U.S. Senate. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most humbling experiences of my life to receive that vote of confidence from the people in my district, and also to receive the appointment from our governor. Since that time, I've been working really hard during the session, and I always knew that I was going to stand for re-election because I want to continue the work that I'm doing. There's a lot to get up to speed on to be a effective policymaker and representative, and I am so excited to take all of the knowledge that I've gained this session and hopefully apply it over the next 2 years, should I be so lucky to be reelected by my constituents. So in my regular life, as we know, Idaho has a citizens legislature, and so we are people from all walks of life. We are teachers, we are farmers, and I happen to be a lawyer. And so in the regular part of the year, I work as a lawyer, and one of the things that I was able to do last year was to represent Idahoans United for Women and Families to bring a challenge to the ballot titles and the fiscal impact statement that were assigned to the initiative to restore reproductive freedom in Idaho. And we succeeded in that challenge, and I'm proud to say we have great accurate ballot titles that will be printed on the ballots in November, hopefully when the initiative qualifies for the ballot. I know the folks that have been working on that initiative have received incredible response from communities all over Idaho that want to restore reproductive freedom and privacy, and they want the decision regarding women's health care to be between a woman and her doctor. And so I look forward to that initiative appearing on the ballot this November, and for Idahoans to get to make the choice for themselves.
This is a question I usually end with. What would you say is the best way for your constituents to be involved in the legislative process?
I think it varies depending upon who the people are and what kind of time they have in their life. What I always tell people is that being involved isn't a one-size-fits-all proposition. And there are times in folks' lives, like maybe when they're retired, that they have a little more time to be precinct captains or to organize meetings in their communities, to pull up the reins in that way. Whereas busy college students, might have time to stay up on the news, and then when something crosses their screens that they're invested in and concerned about, to give their representatives a call, to send that email, and if at all possible, to come to the State House and provide testimony in a hearing about how proposed legislation will impact them or their families. I have been incredibly proud of the young people that I've seen come here this session and, oftentimes very bravely share personal stories or, real tangible impact stories about how legislation is going to affect them. That provides us so much insight into what our constituents and what Idaho wants and needs. So any level of involvement is a good level of involvement, and especially if people have never voted or they've stopped voting, I would really encourage folks to vote, especially in primary elections in Idaho. primary elections are incredibly important to deciding who is here in the State House representing people. So vote on May 5th and vote again in November.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Representative Haws, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's absolutely been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.